Hello friends, Jeff here from House of Heresy. I'm back once again with another deck tech video where we look at one of my commander slash EDH decks and kind of break it down and talk about all the cards and why I put what I did in there. So as always, I am by no means a commander or deck building expert. This is just a fun way for me to share the different decks that I have and to let everyone kind of see maybe some different takes on what they would normally see in their local playing group or whatever. I certainly am bound to make mistakes and or just not really aware of some cards. So please, by all means, throw some comments in there if you have any suggestions or thoughts or whatever, and I'd love to hear it. So today we are going to be doing some Rakdos. We're going to be looking at Karazikar, the Eye Tyrant, and this is my goad deck, although it's not chock full of goaded or goad enablers, so it's got kind of a mix of stuff. This is not one of my more powerful decks, but it is a lot of fun and definitely can make for some entertaining games. So let's get into it. Alright, so Karazikar, the Eye Tyrant, is a Rakdos commander. He's black, red, 3 generic for a 5/5 beholder. And whenever you attack a player, tap target creature that player controls and goad it. Whenever an opponent attacks another one of your opponents, you and the attacking player each draw a card and lose a life. So there's an incentive for them not to attack you, and you make sure that as long as you're attacking each turn, you can make sure that you're able to goad some creatures so that they are attacking your opponents, or most likely attacking your opponents. There's definitely ways around goad, but yeah, so he's a little on the pricey side at 5 mana for a commander, but once he comes out, he is a lot of fun, and most people enjoy the card draw, so they're willing to suffer for a few turns at least before they don't like what you have going on your side of the board. So let's get into the rest of the deck. Alright, so the actual stack of cards here that have goad on them is fairly small. First one, this guy could be the commander in his own right. In fact, if you wanted to swap things around, you could definitely run him. Cardu, Doomed Scourge. He is a red, black, 2 generic for a 4/3, and when he ETBs until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat Fable and attack a player other than you Fable, so essentially goad. And whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So it's a nice way to slam him on the board and make sure everyone's swinging at each other except for you, and go from there. Next up, we got the Bothersome Quasit. This one came out of Baldur's Gate. So a red and 2 generic for a 3/2 with Menace. Goaded creatures your opponents control can't block, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, goad target creature an opponent controls. So this is a nice enabler. This is a pretty easy way to get goads, because we do have a fair number of non-creature spells in this deck. And then also ensures that those goaded creatures are more likely to stick around because they can't block, so that means that they can't be killed off before they get to attack and net you some card draw. Alright, then we got Frenzied Saddlebrute for a red and 4 generic, 5/4 with haste. All creatures can attack your opponents and planeswalkers your opponents control as though those creatures had haste. So this, I guess this technically isn't goad. I probably should put this in the other pile. But this is a really strong incentive for your opponents to be swinging out at somebody other than you. And if your commander's out there, then also generating both of you card draw. So most people like it when their creatures have haste. And this guy, it surprisingly sticks around longer than you would think. But it can be pretty beneficial, not just with attacking, but also allowing your opponents to do actually, never mind, sorry, scratch that. So yep, it is a pretty fun, strong card. It's a little expensive, 5 mana for a 5/4, but has a pretty cool ability. You get Geode Rager, also expensive, 2 red, 4 generic for a 4/3 with first strike. This guy's got landfall. Whenever a land ETBs, goad each creature target player controls. So we have a couple ways, essentially through the basic land fetch lands that we'll get into later, that it could generate potentially 2 landfall triggers, but we really don't have a lot of easy ways to put multiple lands on the battlefield in one turn. So most likely you're just getting one of your opponents goaded, but still pretty cool. It's a fun little ability. All right, Agitator Ant. This one's actually a lot of fun. Everybody is pretty entertained when he comes out. So he's red 2 generic for 2/2. At the beginning of your end step, each player may put 2 1/1 counters on a creature they control. Goad each creature that had counters put on it this way. I would say 9 times out of 10 when I play this card, my opponents all take advantage of this and pump up their creatures and swing them at somebody other than me. So it's pretty cool. It's a fun fun little ability there, and he's just a little 2/2, so if somebody really wanted to pop him, they could, but he usually sticks around because everyone likes making their creatures all swole. All right, then we have some not creatures, but still enable the goad. So this is an enchantment aura, Vow of Torment for a black and 2 generic. Enchant creature, and enchanted creature gets +2/+2, has menace, and can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. So this doesn't force them to attack, it just precludes them from attacking you, which is in a lot of ways the same. So it gives your opponents more flexibility and makes these creatures bigger, but they can never attack you as long as they're enchanted there. So even late game, this has a little bit more utility than just pure goad does. All right. And then you got, of course, Shiny Impetus. This is one of the classic ones. So red 2 generic, another enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and is goaded. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, you create a treasure token. So gets you some treasure, forces them to attack with whatever creature. It doesn't give them menace, and it goads them. So there are some positives and negatives to that, but it's another nice way to ensure that if there's a big creature on the other side of the board, that it's not coming your way. And then we got Parasitic Impetus, which is another enchantment aura, black 2 generic. For enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and is goaded. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, its controller loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So gets you a little bit of life, bumps up their creature, and forces them to attack. So it goes well in the deck. And then finally, another really fun one, the Bloodthirsty Blade. So for 2 generic, it's an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and is goaded, and you can pay 1 to attach Bloodthirsty Blade to target creature an opponent controls, activate only as a sorcery. So you can't pass this around from turn to turn because you can only activate it as a sorcery, but it's still pretty nice. It gives you some good control over who's getting goaded in a lot of situations. All right, so that covers the cards that are pretty either goad or very near to it in terms of the wording on it. Next stack is just the rest of the creatures, and then some other cards that kind of affect the board state, because that's really what a goad deck is doing, is you're affecting the board state without necessarily directly like casting a spell or something like that. Although a lot of times that effect comes out of casting something. But you just want to force your opponents to do other things, or force them to be playing in a board state that they don't have as much control over. So first one, Death Tyrant. So black and 4 generic for a 4/6 Beholder Skeleton. It's got menace. And whenever an attacking creature you control or a blocking creature an opponent controls dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature. So the second part of this is what's most beneficial, because if you're goading other people and they're attacking each other, chances are that they'll have somebody blocking, especially if you're goading some of the really big stuff like a Blightsteel or an Eldrazi or something like that. So you have a decent chance of getting some zombies out of it. And then you can also recur it for 6 mana. I can't say I've ever done that, but at least the ability is there. You got the Chittering Witch, so black 3 generic for a 2/2 human. When it ETBs, create a number of 1/1 black rat creature tokens equal to the number of opponents you have, and then you can pay 1 in a black, sacrifice a creature. Target creature gets -2 until end of turn. So this is kind of just building up a board state, and then if you so choose, you can utilize your second ability to murder some problem creatures, either with the rats or with other stuff. It's mainly in there just to generate some tokens, and it seems like kind of a fun card. All right, then we got Gonti, Lord of Luxury. 2 black, 2 generic for 2/3 with Death Touch and lots of text. So when he ETBs, you can look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library, exile one of them face down, then put the rest on the bottom of that library in a random order. You can look at and cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you can spend mana as over mana of any color to cast that spell. So he's just kind of an obnoxious card. Comes in, and you can affect your opponent's library, essentially the top of their library. So may or may not be beneficial, but it's essentially a card draw, really, because you get access to one card that you can then cast. So it's pretty useful and kind of fun. Port Razor, so 2 red, 3 generic for a 4/4 Orc Pirate. When it deals combat damage to a player, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there is an additional combat phase. Port Razor can't attack a player it has already attacked this turn. So this one plays well into the commander because if you only have 1 or 2 creatures that are able to attack, then this lets you kind of cycle through all your opponents and hopefully be dealing combat damage. But it's a nice way to generate some additional combat and hopefully do some damage there and get everybody goaded. Then you got the Nighthawk Scavenger, 2 black, 1 generic for a variable power, 3 toughness with flying, death touch, and lifelink. And it's got power equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyard. So we really don't have a lot of ways. We're not trying to mill or anything like that, but it's just got a large number of keywords on there and has the potential to be kind of mean and hopefully connect for some damage to enable some of our other cards. Then you got the Bloodthirsty Adversary for 1 and a red. It's got haste and it's 2/2, and it's a 2/2. When it ETBs, you can pay 2 and a red any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many 1/1 counters on the adversary, then exile up to that many target instant and or sorcery cards with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard and copy them. You may cast any number of those copies without paying their mana cost. So like I said before, we do have a decent number of non-creature spells and therefore a decent number of instants and sorceries. So it's kind of just a useful utility card. Doesn't really do anything with the actual theme of the deck, but it's nice. It's a nice option to have. And worst case, it's a 2/2 with haste, so you might be able to get an extra opponent's creature goaded with if you have Karazikar out on the board. All right, then we got Stormfist Crusader, black and a red for a 2/2 with menace. And at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card and loses 1 life. So kind of a group hug style, and with a similar ability to Karazikar or Gix, or some of those other black themed card draw where you lose a life to draw a card. Itali, because why not? Just another way to get access to some more cards. So for 2 red, 4 generic, it's a 6/6, and whenever he attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. So usually once Itali hits the board, people perk up and want to kill him. They pay much closer attention to your board state. So this is kind of one of the ways we can edge the game closer to completion, especially if we've been doing it right and our opponents have just been beating on each other for most of the game. Then this might be a way to finish off an opponent or create a board state that's insurmountable. Then we got just some cards that help us when we are again trying to progress our position within the game, or some of them are just fun. So Vorpal Sword. This is one of those ones that you either love it or you hate it. I definitely enjoy it. I cannot say that I have won with it, but it's still, again, it's one of those cards that once people read it, it makes them pay pretty close attention. So for 1 black, you play it out there. It's an artifact equipment, and equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has death touch. So that's nice. 1 black to play it, 2 black to equip it. So for 3 black, you could have a 2/0 with death touch, or +2/+0 with death touch. And then you also, if you have the mana for it, can pay 3 black, 5 generic. Until end of turn, Vorpal Sword gains whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. So this is kind of a fun way to, like I said, kind of push us towards an end state. Maybe knock somebody off if we're able to get in without being blocked, or people are already down hard or something like that. Or it's just a card that can take their attention away from other parts of your board state. Then you got Swiftfoot Boots, because it's always nice to be able to protect your commander or other creatures. And then I got a few enchantments here. So again, these are cards that kind of affect the board state in some way, shape, or form, either by an opponent indirectly or as a whole. So Captive Audience, it is expensive, but the effects are pretty powerful. So for red, black, 5 generic, Captive Audience enters the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Your life total becomes 4. Discard your hand. Each opponent creates 5 2/2 black zombie creatures, and it's your opponent that's, because they have control of it. It's your opponent that's making that choice on their upkeep. So, giving them some poor choices there for at least 3 turns. And if you're making their life total 4, then they're probably in tough shape. So it's just kind of a fun one if you can get it out there. Curse of Disturbance for black, 2 generic. Enchant player aura. Whenever enchanted player is attacked, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. So this is similar to how our commander wants to group hug with the card draw. He also wants, this card lets us group hug with creating zombies. So incentivizing other players to attack your a specific opponent, or basically somebody other than you, if you don't have a goad mechanic in play at the time. And then finally, Cunning Rhetoric for 2 generic, 1 black. It's an enchantment. Whenever an opponent attacks you and or one or more planeswalkers you control, exile the top card of that player's library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as over mana of any color to cast it. So this is another way to disincentivize your opponents attacking you. So it's pretty easy, or it's an easier decision for them to not want to swing at you if they know that you're going to be getting to gain access to the top of their library. So it's a fun card. Definitely makes people sit up and pay closer attention. And then, just because, as you see, we don't have a ton of goad specific cards, there's a decent number of cards that enable card draw in some way, shape, or form in here. So that's mostly what this pile is. So we've got Stinging Study for a black 4 generic. You draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the mana value of a commander you own on the battlefield or in the command zone. So you would be drawing 5 cards, losing 5 life, which for 5 mana is actually a pretty good deal. So it's a pretty decent card, especially later in the game. Valakut Awakening, you could play this as a red mana source if you wanted to, or you can put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards +1. So it's just a way to kind of cycle through some of your hand if you don't like it, and get more cards. Thrill of Possibility. You discard a card to draw 2 cards. I think we've gone over this one before in my Gen deck, I believe. It's a pretty well-known card. Commune with Lava, red, and X. Exile the top X cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So if you have lots of mana and not a lot of cards, this is a good way to generate some card advantage. Wheel of Misfortune. This one's kind of a fun one because it is a little bit confusing, but you pay a red and 2 generic, and it's essentially a wheel. So each player is going to choose a number 0 or greater. Then all players are going to reveal those numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest numbers revealed this way. So Wheel of Fortune is going to deal damage equal to the highest number to each player who chose that number, and each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards their hand and draws 7 cards. So basically, the person who picks the highest number, or person or people who pick the highest number, if multiple people pick the same number, they're going to take that much damage. The lowest person is just not going to get to draw any cards. And then everybody who wasn't that lowest person will get to discard their hand and draw 7 cards. That's basically how it works. It's a very confusing Wheel of Fortune. But that's the gist of it there. So, all right, then we got Fevered Suspicion, another expensive card for a red, black, and 6 generic. Each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of those spells from among those non-land cards without paying their mana cost. And it's got Rebound. So if you cast it, then you exile it as it resolves, and at the beginning of your next upkeep, you can cast it without paying its mana cost. So you essentially can get this twice for 8 mana, which doesn't feel great, but again, this is not a high-powered deck, so this is more of what we like to call fair magic in my group. So, and it's a fun card. it is definitely entertaining to see it go off. All right, Faithless Looting, another one of the Faithless cards there. So you draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and you can flashback this one. So again, another one of those classic looting cards. Humble Defector. So this one's fun because we're already doing kind of group huggy to a degree type things. So this one's kind of fun to play the politic game at the table there. So for a red and 1 generic, you get a 2/1 rogue that you can tap to draw 2 cards. And then target opponent gains control of Humble Defector. Activate this ability only during your turn. So you play it, you gotta wait a turn, then you can tap it on your turn, draw the cards, and then pass it to somebody else. So it's kind of a fun way to politic around there. And it also gives you a way to give your opponents creatures if they didn't already have them so that you can goad them. So it's not the greatest goaded creature, but still, it's better. It can be better than nothing. And then finally we got Vargoth Bloodsky Sire, who's black and 2 generic. I'm sorry, we got one more after this one. Black 2 generic 2/3 demon rogue with death touch, and then he's got boast. So when you play with the boast mechanic there, you can pay black and generic, and target player searches the library for a card, then shuffles the library and puts that card on top of it. So this is actually the only tutor I have in the deck. I didn't put any other tutors in here. I probably could, but again, this is kind of a lower powered, more fun style deck. So this is the only way to tutor, so it's not as easy to do it as just playing like Demonic or Vampiric or something like that. And then finally we got the Keen Duelist for a black and 1 generic for a 2/2. At the beginning of your upkeep, you and target opponent each reveal the top card of your library. You each lose life equal to the mana value of the card revealed by the other player. You each put the card you revealed into your hand. So you'll each be drawing cards and doing damage to each other. So it's kind of a fun little mechanic there. We do have some expensive cards, as you've seen in here, so this could be good. Could blast him in the face. You would probably want to be careful with who you choose, because if you're playing like a green Stompy deck or something like that with a bunch of, or like colorless Eldrazi or something, you probably don't want to be picking those people because they're going to absolutely smack you in the face for a lot. But if you know an opponent's playing a lower mana value curve deck, then this is a good way to go. And this is kind of a fun card. All right, next up we got, this is pretty much just all of our single target removal. So kind of help clear the way or interact with the board as needed. So we got Bedevil, a red 2 black to destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. So gives us some opportunities to deal with planeswalkers and artifacts, which isn't always a common single target removal source. So you got Terminate, destroy target creature, can't be regenerated. Hagra Mauling. This is another one that you can use for land if you don't want to do this, but for 2 black, 2 generic, you can destroy target creature, and it costs 1 less to cast if an opponent controls no basic lands. So for like a single target removal spell, it doesn't feel good. Even if one of them has no basic lands, you're still looking at a 3-cost single target removal. But it does also give you the option to use it as a land, and it's a fair card. So if it seemed like, why not? Murderous Rider. If you play it for the adventure, it's 2 black, 1 generic to destroy target creature or planeswalker. You lose 2 life, so it's a nice way to, again, interact with planeswalkers. Or you can play him as the creature for 2 black, 1 generic. Zombie Knight with lifelink. It's a 2/3, and then when he dies, you put it at the bottom of its owner's library. So it can be a nice little body there for 3 mana. Chaos Warp, which is always entertaining. We've had this work out great in our pod. Not really me casting it, but other people in their decks. We've also had it be disastrous. So definitely against one of my friends who runs a colorless, mostly artifact deck. He does have some Eldrazi in there with the new Urza's Liberator from the Brothers War as his commander. And we definitely traded up to a Darksteel Forge, which felt really bad because what we destroyed wasn't nearly as detrimental to the board state as that ended up being. But it can do great things or it can do terrible things. That's why it's chaos. It's a lot of fun. You find some prisoners. So for a red and 1 generic, you choose You can either destroy target artifact, which is why this is in the single target removal pile, or you can exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. Choose one of them, and until the end of your next turn, you may play that card, and you may spend manas or mana of any color to cast it. So this is single target removal or a little bit of card draw, kind of. Got Rakdos Charm, black and red. To choose one, you can exile all cards from target player's graveyard. You can, again, destroy target artifact, or each creature deals 1 damage to its controller, which is always fun if somebody goes really wide. And you can just have them have all those elves nuke their controller. Baleful Mastery, a black and 3 generic. You can also play this for a black and 1 generic. If you do, then your opponent's going to draw, or then an opponent will draw a card, and then it's exile target creature or planeswalker. So this is actually pretty nice because it gives us an exile single target removal, which black doesn't always have a ton of. And the cost of one of your opponents drawing a card isn't as steep as it could be in Commander, because it's, again, kind of a political tool. You can incentivize people to do things for you or not do things to you by giving them card draw when you're blowing up somebody else's creature or planeswalker. Hurl Through Hell, red, black, and 2 generic. Exile target creature until end of your next turn. You may cast that card and may spend mana as though were mana of any color to cast that spell. So again, another exile effect, and you have the option to buy it back, essentially, and play it yourself. So that's kind of cool. It's a fun card. Deflecting Swat. This is one of the free commander spells from Commander 20. So if you control a commander, you may cast the spell without paying its mana cost. So most people, that's how they would play it. And you can choose new targets for target spell or ability. So it's kind of sort of a counter spell, but it doesn't necessarily have to be even affecting something that's targeting you. If you just want to sow chaos on the table, you can pick a spell that somebody else is targeting and then have them target something else. So it's pretty fun. It's, again, kind of a fun little political card. Chef's Kiss, 2 red and 1 generic. So you can gain control of target spell that targets only a single permanent or player. Copy it, then reselect targets at random for the spell and the copy. The new targets can't be you or a permanent you control. So you're basically picking a spell, copying it, and then randomly selecting targets that aren't anything that you or things that you control. So it's pretty entertaining. And it can be pretty powerful too, especially depending on what the board state looks like. If there's only so many targets for destroy target creature, then you could end up blowing up the person's creatures that cast it if it's selected randomly or something like that. So it's a very situational card, but it is pretty fun to play. And then, of course, Tybalt's Trickery, because why not? So it's a red, 1 generic. It's a counter spell. And then you're going to randomly choose 1, 2, or 3. So usually we'll roll a d3. Then its controller mills that many cards and exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than that spell. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then they put the exiled cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. So essentially what this is doing, it's less impactful. The first part of it's less impactful in Commander because of the singleton format. This would be more powerful in, say, like Standard or something like that, or Modern, where you're likely to have 4 copies of spells. So discarding those cards would then potentially protect them for the opponent, because you're exiling a non-land card with a different name from that spell. Well, I guess you're not really protecting it. You're just stopping them from casting it. But in Commander, it really doesn't matter. You're basically just countering a spell, making them mill between 1 and 3 cards, and then they get to cast the first non-land spell that comes up, because outside of a very small number of decks like Relentless Rats or a Persistent Petitioners or something like that, you're almost always going to be just casting the first non-land spell that comes up. So it's for 2 mana in red. It's still fun and can lead to some entertaining outcomes. We're all about the chaos in this deck. And finally, red Elemental Blast, because most pods have at least 1 blue player, so you can stick it to them. Countering target blue spell or destroy target blue permanent, because why not? All right, then we have our sweepers. So Blasphemous Act. It's red and 8 generic, but it costs 1 generic less to cast for each creature on the board, and it deals 13 damage to each creature. It doesn't help you if your opponents are playing indestructible creatures or vigor, which we have 100% had in my play group, in an effort to quote-unquote control me in my board state. I had a couple 6/6s. They threw Blasphemous Act down while one of our other opponents had Vigor and a pretty good sized board state. And yeah, that ended the game pretty much right then and there, or on the next turn, when that player was able to swing out with their much larger board state. All right, Toxic Deluge, because that's one of the best ways to clear a board. As long as you have the life to pay it. It does cost you life, so I don't mind putting it in here because we don't have a ton of really much life gain in this deck, so it's just kind of a fun way to, or well, might not be fun for your opponents, but it's an effective way that has a bit of a cost to clearing the board, and this one does get around things like vigor or indestructible or what have you, because it's putting the -1/-1 or it's giving them -1/-1. It's not destroying them or doing damage to them. Vandal Blast, because with the last year or so, we've been having lots of great artifacts come into the format, or more copies of them. So what better way to handle that than destroying one or all the artifacts you don't control? So just a good card. Dance Macabre is 2 black, 3 generic for a sorcery. Each player sacrifices a non-token creature, then you roll a d20 and add the toughness of the creature you sacrifice this way. And if you get a 1 to 14, you return a creature card put into the graveyard this turn onto the battlefield under your control. So it doesn't have to be you, it could be whoever, and it doesn't have to be through this effect, it just had to have happened this turn. Or if you manage to roll 15 plus, then you return up to 2 creatures put into the graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. So either way, you're getting a creature back. So if you're pretty much guaranteed to get your creature back if you so choose, because at a minimum you're getting a creature card. For 5 mana, to have everybody sacrifice a creature and then really have super negative for you is not terrible, especially if you do this in your second main, I guess. But it's fun. Making people sacrifice stuff usually makes them a little salty, so that's entertaining. And this deck is already going to be making people kind of salty with making them do things they don't want to do. And then you got Hellish Rebuke for a black 2 generic. Until end of turn, permanents your opponent's control gain. When this permanent deals damage to the player who cast Hellish Rebuke, which would be you, sacrifice this permanent, you lose 2 life. So you basically cast this in the combat step, and then after they've declared attackers, and then any creature that does damage to you gets sacrificed by its controller, and they lose 2 life. So now you'll be taking whatever damage goes through, because it's only this only goes into effect when they deal damage to you, but it's still pretty fun, surprising way. And then finally Nev's Disc, just because why not? 4 generic, ETB's tapped, and then you can pay 1 and tap it to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So it's just kind of a board wipe that everybody sees coming. All right, then we get into kind of our ramp in different forms here. So Jessica's Will, you could call this card draw as well. I think people tend to prioritize the mana generation more than the card draw in my experience, but it's a good utility card, so you could do it either way. Looks like this card actually, never mind, that's just the sleeve. Okay. All right, so for a red 2 generic, you can choose one. If you control a commander, as you cast a spell, you may choose both. So you add 1 red for each card in target opponent's hand. So you pick the person with the biggest hand, and then you generate that much red, or you can exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. So it's another way to kind of generate some card advantage, get access to some more cards, and it's just a really strong card. most people that play red, if they have access to the card, we'll put that in the deck because there's not a lot of downside to it. You got Mana Geyser, 2 red, 3 generic. Add a red for each tapped land your opponents control. So later in the game, when everyone's tapped out, when it gets to your turn, this is a great way to generate a bunch of mana. Could also not work at all and be a dead card in your hand. It's 5 mana, so it's a little pricey. So there better be more than 5 tapped lands, or it's not worth casting. But it's one of those ones that why not, right? Because it's entertaining. Dark Ritual. I think most people are familiar with this card. It's very strong. Solemn Simulacrum. So this is another way you can potentially get multiple land drops for the landfall trigger. On who was that? On the Geode Rager. So Solemn Simulacrum is another way to potentially get that. But when ETBs, you search your library for basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle, and then when he dies, you draw a card. So it helps you ramp, helps you card draw. It's 4 mana for a 2/2, so not the greatest, but you're not really expecting him to live. Burnished Heart, another one of the classic commander cards. It's a little more expensive and one of the more fair ways to ramp. You're essentially paying 6 mana, 3 to cast him, and 3 for the ability to sacrifice him and search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So it's 3 mana for a 2/2, and then you have to pay another 3 to sack him to go find 2 lands. But ramp is ramp. And then we got our mana rocks. So Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Commander Sphere, Thought Vessel, Fellwar Stone, Mind Stone, and then some of the probably a little bit less common ones that are kind of situational. But with all of our artifact hate in the deck, this one's actually has some pretty good utility. So Liquid Metal Torque is 2 generic. You can tap it for a colorless, or you can tap it and target non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. So this is a great way to open up some of your removal, either through Vandal Blast or the single target removal for artifacts that we went over before. So yeah, not too terrible. Then you got Rakdos Signet, which lets you just kind of filter and generate a couple mana. Charcoal Diamond and Fire Diamond are the mana rocks there. And then Curse Mirror is kind of a fun one. So red and 2 generic, you can tap it for a red, and then as it enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield until end of turn, except it has haste. So again, another way you can take advantage of your commander if he's on the battlefield to swing out at another opponent to goad one of their creatures, hopefully. And then if nothing else, it's at a bare minimum, it's a mana rock. And then Everflowing Chalice, which isn't particularly great, but it costs 0, and then multi-kicker 2, so you can pay the 2 any number of times. And then it'll enter the battlefield with a charge counter for each time it was kicked, and then you add a colorless for each charge counter on it. So if you pay 4, it'll tap for 2 each turn. If you pay 6, it'll tap for 3, and so on. All right, and then finally we get into the lands. So we have some utility lands. Maze of Ith is a nice way to protect you. If people just won't get the hint and swing at your opponents, then you can always Maze of Ith them. Rogue's Passage and the Access Tunnel both allow you to swing in without being blocked, or lets you assist your opponents when you goad them and make sure that they connect if it's beneficial to you for like killing a planeswalker or getting that final few points of damage on your opponent. There's nothing that says, because it's just target creature, it's nothing that says it has to be your creature. And they both tap for colorless as well. So really good in this deck. Bojuka Bog, just threw it in there because why not? Potentially can shut down some decks or make them a little bit more challenging. You exile all cards from target player's graveyard when it ETBs. It does come into play tapped, so it's not a particularly fast form of mana for you. Then you got Castle Lochwain. Enters tapped unless you control Swamp, which hopefully you do. And then you can tap it for black, or you can pay 2 black, 1 generic to draw a card, then lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. So if you're really low on cards, then this is probably not that bad, especially if you have no cards. You can tap it, or you can do that to basically lose life to draw a card. Command Beacon, because our commander's expensive, so if we can reduce that commander tax later in the game, then so much the better. Reliquary Tower, we have the potential to draw a bunch of cards, and it'd be nice to keep them. So we also have Thought Vessel in here, so a few options for no max hand size. Temple of the False God, it's a land that gives you 2 for 1 there. So if you, it's not great, obviously, in your opening hand in most situations, because you're probably going to be stuck with a land that you can't use right away, but after you get that 4th land down, then being able to play Temple of False Gods is nice, because as you saw, we have some expensive spells in here, so having that extra mana is good. All right, then we have our few different ways to go searching for stuff for lands. So we got Fabled Passage, Terramorphic Expanse, Myriad Landscape, and Evolving Wilds. So all the classic ways to find basic lands. And then we got some dual lands of different varieties. So Foreboding Ruins, you just have to reveal a swamp or mountain from your hand, and if you don't, then it enters tapped. Haunted Ridge will come in tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Rakdos Carnarium, you have to bounce land back to your hand, then it taps for 2 afterwards. Smoldering Marsh enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. And then Blightstep Pathway. So it's a pathway, you can play it for either the black or the red side, depending on what you need. And then Command Tower, because really every deck that has more than one color should have Command Tower in there, because it's just good. And then we have a few basics. We have more mountains than swamps, because that's just how the distribution of the deck plays out. And that's it. So I hope everyone enjoyed it. I know this is kind of not the most powerful deck, and this is built to be more of like a fun style deck. So it's not really designed to be super competitive, which means that it's not as coherent as some of my other decks in terms of what it's trying to do and all the cards. Like I don't have a ton of goad cards. I mean, you saw like these are all the cards pretty much that say goad or have a similar effect to goad, and everything else is just kind of other stuff. So it's not going to overwhelm your opponents and be ridiculously oppressive. And I can speak from experience, it is fairly easy for people to deal with it if they so choose. But usually there's enough incentives, especially once you get like Karazikar out or some of the other cards out, where people don't necessarily want to blow your stuff up because they want to keep getting that card draw, because everyone likes card draw. And one card for 1 life is a pretty good deal in most situations in Commander, so you tend to get a lot of takers. As far as power level goes, I mean, there are some good cards in here, like Toxic Deluge, but I would probably rate this at a 7, to be perfectly honest, because there's a lot of expensive stuff in here, and it's not super optimized. So I really maybe 7.5, because we got a couple cards that are on the high tier list. But at the end of the day, like this is not like a reliable, crazy deck. It's for win condition, it's relying on hitting your opponents in the face, hopefully enticing them to hit each other in the face, and then you finishing them off. But there really are no alternate win cons in here. There's no infinite combos or anything like that, so it's not the strongest, most powerful deck imaginable, but it is a lot of fun to play. Everyone enjoys it, even though I always get groans when I say I'm breaking out the goad deck, but it's pretty entertaining, especially with some certain card type or deck types, because there are a few deck types out there that play creatures and don't want those creatures to attack, so it's always fun to force them to do so. They're usually the ones that go after me first. So yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed. It's always fun doing these. If you liked what you saw, please give us a like. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. I've got multiple videos coming out every week. Twice a week we do the box breaks or pack cracking on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then Saturdays we have the Commander/EDH deck tech videos. So we'll keep doing these as long as I have decks to do them for, and then we'll probably switch to something else, because I don't have unlimited decks, but still have a few more to go. So no danger of cutting this series off early or soon. So yeah, thanks again. Throw some comments down there. Let me know what you like about it, what you don't, what you think I could improve on. If you've played this guy, he's definitely not the most popular Rakdos commander. He actually came out of the Prosper deck, and Prosper is at least according to EDH Rec, is the most popular Rakdos commander. So this guy does not get as much love, but he is pretty entertaining, and I definitely enjoy him. So thanks again, and until next time.